In this episode of American Greed, Carlos Perez-Olivo, a lawyer with a silver tongue.
He had a gift, his voice, his diction. He was an actor.
And solid gold taste.
Even though I made a lot of money, I spent a lot of money.
But when he's disbarred for fleecing desperate clients, he finds another way to make money.
Oh my goodness, he's really that greedy.
And proves that greed really is a deadly sin.
You have a disbarred lawyer, you have a slain wife, you have a mistress, you have a life insurance policy. Just an unbelievably gripping saga.
Are you driving a car right now?
I'm trying to get my dad to the hospital. I think he might be, I think he got shot.
On November 18th, 2006, former attorney Carlos Perez-Olivo and his wife Peggy are leaving a fancy dinner in Manhattan and heading home to Westchester County. It's a typical Saturday night in what seems like a fairy tale marriage, one that started more than 30 years ago, and one Perez-Olivo says he had a feeling about from the first night they met.
Basically, I talked to her all night. I saw her the next day, and by the end of the next day, it was like I'd known her all my life. 3 or 4 weeks after that, I got rid of all the other girls that I knew. 3 months after that, I proposed to her, and 6 months after that, I was married.
They have 3 children together, and Peggy becomes a teaching assistant where her youngest child went to elementary school. At a salary of less than $25,000 a year, she does it simply for the satisfaction it gives her.
She loved it. She loved it. And she was very good at it. And I think they were very fond of her.
But on this night, just after 11 p.m. on a dark, lonely highway, just 5 miles from home, Perez-Olivo says he and Peggy are run off the road by an unknown vehicle.
Car came up, cut in front of me. I didn't want to hit it because I'd been drinking.
According to Perez-Olivo, a man with a gun approaches and jumps in his back seat. Perez-Olivo tries to disarm him. In the ensuing struggle, Perez-Olivo says 3 shots go off. One strikes Perez-Olivo in the abdomen, and the assailant flees the scene. Perez-Olivo turns his attention to his wife, Peggy.
I remember seeing that Peggy had her head, by the window. And I said, Peggy, Peggy. And there was no answer, so I figured something was wrong.
It appears that a stray bullet has hit Peggy in the back of the head. As Perez-Olivo races for the hospital, he calls 911. But not long after he arrives, the police raise some questions about what Perez-Olivo says happens that night. Was this a random act of violence or an execution? Perez-Olivo's life begins to turn toward this dark road more than a decade earlier, where this seemingly rundown building in the Bronx actually houses a lucrative criminal defense practice. According to author Kevin McMurray, it affords Carlos Perez-Olivo and his wife Peggy an enviable lifestyle.
They love to go into the city, see movies, have dinner. They traveled back and forth to Puerto Rico. He eventually moved up to Chappaqua, which is a very affluent community in Westchester County.
There's just one problem. Many clients claim he's a crook. Belzebel Fernandez is a second-generation American living and working on Long Island. In the mid-90s, she hears some bad news about her younger brother, Omar Sanabia.
He was just, a young kid hanging out with the wrong crowd. And the way that it is, it ended up in the wrong direction.
Omar has been arrested for assault. As he sits in jail, Belsabel and her mother scramble to find an attorney, and they find Carlos Perez-Olivo. Frightened, overwhelmed, and new to hiring lawyers, the Sanabria family looks for reassurance, and Perez-Olivo immediately provides it.
He told us and my parents, listen, I understand, what you're going through, and, I'm a father as well.
Desperate to protect Omar as best they can, Belsabel's parents sell their home in the Dominican Republic to pay his legal bills, including $15,000 in bail money. Omar eventually pleads guilty to assault and is sentenced to 6 years maximum in prison. Perez-Olivo makes the Sanabias an offer. He tells them he can get their $15,000 of bail money returned to them more quickly because of his connections. Since they still owe him $5,000, he signs a note saying he'll take that balance out of the $15,000 of bail money and return $10,000 to them.
I signed over the paperwork for him to take his balance, and he said, I'll contact you within the week.
But at the end of the week, and the next week, and the next, there's still no word. After months go by without being able to contact Perez-Olivo, the Sanabria family thinks their money is lost.
I'm like, we got stiffed. We got robbed.
They aren't the only ones to think so. Andrew Bratton is the retired Deputy Chief Counsel for the New York Supreme Court Disciplinary Committee, where angry clients can go to get grievances with their lawyers resolved. Bratton says that he hears more than a dozen similar complaints from clients about Perez-Olivo.
I think what happened here is that Mr. Perez-Olivo had a large mill type of practice.
And his mill keeps churning out clients. In a place like New York City, which processes more than 1,000 criminal arraignments per day, Perez-Olivo apparently believes in quantity over quality.
What he did is that he stopped caring. He had so many clients, it was such a business, life was good, and these people just became a cash register for him.
When American greed returns, Carlos Perez-Olivo continues mining clients for money. But can he keep taking it without consequence?
These people you don't walk over. This was Mr. Perez-Olivo's downfall, because he assumed he can just walk over everybody.
By 1996, some of criminal defense attorney Carlos Perez-Olivo's clients are accusing him of not doing the work he's been hired to perform. But when they try to get their money back, they can't find him.
I kept calling and kept calling. Nobody would ever return their call to me. So I went over there, and he wasn't there. Nobody was there. He's gone.
Perez-Olivo has uprooted his family from the plush New York suburbs and taken them to his hometown of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Bo Vasquez is a longtime friend of Perez-Olivo dating back to the 70s, when Vasquez was a court reporter in the Puerto Rico Federal Court, and Perez-Olivo was a young attorney just starting out.
He had a gift, his voice, his diction. It got to the point, whenever Carlos was in trial, people could fit into the courtroom. They wanted to see him in action because he would put on a show. He was an actor.
And as his legend grew, so did his clientele.
Whenever he would go to visit his clients in prison, they told him that they had other inmates that wanted to use him as an attorney, and they wanted to dispense with the services of their prior attorney.
It's a level of success he'll need to repeat upon his return to the island 15 years later. Vasquez says that Perez-Olivo's wife, Peggy, has become accustomed to a certain lifestyle.
She had to have a certain type of a car, and she needed to have a cleaning woman, and she had to have a house of certain dimensions.
Both my wife and I kind of believe that you never knew when life was going to end. So we lived as well as we could.
It means the pressure is on Perez-Olivo.
He felt that he had to get a lot of cases, he had to get a lot of clients, he had to charge them higher fees, and he had to deliver.
From what Vasquez remembers of the Perez-Olivo of the 70s, he thinks delivering will be no problem for the mesmerizing courtroom performer. But Vasquez soon discovers that the Carlos Perez-Olivo who left the island more than 15 years ago is not the same man who has returned.
Some time goes by, and I was approached by many of these attorneys that told me how disappointed they were in Carlos and how ineffective he was and things that he was doing. He was falling asleep in court.
And his clients are outraged.
He was taking the money and not doing the work that he was supposed to have been doing.
One client claims to have given Perez-Olivo $30,000 to work on an appeal, which Perez-Olivo never files. He simply takes the money and breaks off all contact. And that client isn't alone. 3 more clients issue complaints, and the Puerto Rico federal court decides to step in.
There was a hearing held before a magistrate, and they cited several cases, and they recommended to the judge that he be disbarred.
Instead of answering the charges, Perez-Olivo agrees to surrender his license in Puerto Rico and returns his practice to New York. But a change of scene doesn't mean a change of method. Some clients in New York say he's just back to his old tricks.
What do I think? He is a lowlife.
Angie Stone is a widow living in Westchester County in New York. In 2001, her housekeeper, Tranquilina Leguizamon Diaz, an illegal immigrant from Paraguay, is arrested in a sting operation for trying to buy a visa illegally from an undercover agent. Diaz is eventually convicted of bribing a public official. Before she is sentenced, she decides to change lawyers.
She heard of somebody called Carlos Perez-Olivo. I wasn't altogether comfortable with that, but I called Mr. Olivo.
Diaz and her husband gather their entire life savings, $13,000, to retain Perez-Olivo. But it's not enough. Stone agrees to put in another $7,500 herself. Eileen Shapiro is the attorney who will later take over Diaz's case.
He didn't do anything. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. He didn't put in a sentencing memorandum. It was like he wasn't even present.
He does bother to file a notice of appeal after sentencing, but then lets the deadline to file the appeal itself pass, and the court dismisses it.
It was repellent to me that somebody would do something like this to somebody that was essentially a helpless person.
For Shapiro, there's only one explanation.
He didn't want to write a brief. It's not an easy thing to do, and he took his money, he spent his money, and now it's time to write his brief, and he doesn't want to do it.
The most common complaint against him was that he neglected my case or he didn't do enough.
Andrew Bratton begins gathering complaints about Perez-Olivo in the early 2000s. As part of his role as Deputy Chief Counsel for the New York Supreme Court Disciplinary Committee, he says all the complainants have one thing in common.
Every criminal defendant is faced with deprivation of civil liberty. So by definition, every criminal defendant is scared. And in these cases, not only is the criminal defendant scared and vulnerable, but the families of the criminal defendants are scared and vulnerable.
While Tranquilina Leguizamon Diaz is sitting frightened in jail, waiting for some kind of news or progress, worrying about the welfare of her 2 young children, Carlos Perez-Olivo does nothing. Well, not nothing.
We traveled a lot. I had a lot of cars. I like cars. We'd shop. We'd eat at good restaurants. We believed that you couldn't take it with you, so you might as well enjoy when you could. And as it turns out, I think it was not such a bad philosophy.
Not if you can get away with it. To Perez-Olivo, $10,000 or $20,000 means a family vacation in Europe. But to some of his clients, it's their entire life savings. And one of those clients catches up to him. The Sanabria family had given up on ever recovering the $10,000 that Perez-Olivo had walked away with 5 years earlier. But suddenly, fate intervenes.
My older brother was at the courthouse and kind of remembered his face. And he had never met my older brother. So he went up to him and said, "Oh, you know, are you a lawyer?" And he said, "Yeah." So he gave him the business card.
After nearly 5 years of searching, Belsabel Fernandez has found the man who took her parents' $10,000 and files a complaint with the New York Supreme Court Disciplinary Committee. When American Greed returns, living off his clients' backs is about to catch up to Carlos Perez-Olivo. Will he be able to get by without them?
His credit card debt was mounting. He had no apparent source of income.
Or will it lead him down a path where there's no turning back?
Are you driving a car right now?
I'm trying to get my wife to the I'm trying to get my wife to the hospital. I think she might be. I think.
By 2003, the New York State Supreme Court Disciplinary Committee is getting more and more complaints about criminal defense attorney Carlos Perez-Olivo. Some clients say he's just a con man, taking their money, but not doing any of the work.
We had received, during that period in the early 2000s, roughly at least 15, if not 20 complaints. That stands out. When you get to the level of 10, 15, 20 complaints, you would be considered what we used to call in our office one of our regulars.
The disciplinary committee alerts Perez-Olivo to the complaints, but he doesn't seem too concerned.
You're supposed to answer the complaints right away. Well, I didn't answer them. Sometimes I'd wait, and there was 3 or 4 of them. At 3 or 4 months, I got 4 or 5 threatening letters, and so they weren't very happy with me.
And the complaints keep piling up. In June 2003, Nilsa DiGiacomo gives Perez-Olivo $10,000 to represent her nephew, Miguel Delgado, who has been incarcerated for conspiracy to distribute narcotics.
I was scared to death. I was thinking about his kids, about him going to jail, all the horror things that I heard happens in jail.
But less than 5 weeks later, a federal judge kicks Perez-Olivo off the case.
He could represent me for real, because he said that he could.
Unbeknownst to Delgado, Perez-Olivo is already representing a co-conspirator of his, Juan Cruz, a clear conflict of interest. Perez-Olivo claims that Delgado knew there was a possibility of a conflict. And in fact, part of the $10,000 fee was to research whether or not Perez-Olivo would be able to take his case.
I mean, it makes no sense. There's so many lawyers out there. Why would you pay one lawyer $10,000 to find out if he could be a lawyer? It makes no sense.
When Perez-Olivo refuses to return the money, DiGiacomo and Delgado join the group of complainants with the disciplinary committee.
The vast majority of attorneys out there gingerly treat these people because they understand that these people are over a barrel. There are a small segment of attorneys who will use this as an opportunity to enrich themselves, and this is what Mr. Perez-Olivo did.
Andrel Bratton begins disbarment proceedings in the summer of 2005. For many of Perez-Olivo's clients, it's their first chance to confront him.
I wanted to jump over the desk and just punch him in the face.
These people you don't walk over. In these particular cases, this was Mr. Perez-Olivo's downfall, because he assumed he can just walk over everybody.
It's also the first time they get to hear Perez-Olivo's response to their charges.
I earned the money. I have no doubt I did. You know, Abraham Lincoln, you know, president we all quote a lot, basically said an attorney's stock and trade is time. Because I don't sell potatoes, okay? I sell my time.
His clients see it quite differently.
I don't know where he gets that from. He must be dreaming. He didn't do anything.
Perez-Olivo's closing argument, however, reveals a man that apparently believes he's untouchable.
During the final summation, their argument was pretty much, well, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe this practitioner who's been practicing for 25 years, or are you going to believe criminal defendants and their families? Who are you going to believe?
In this case, the court makes perfectly clear who it believes, the clients, and Perez-Olivo is disbarred.
I felt that justice was done. That he earned.
But surprisingly, the decision delights him as well.
I was dancing almost because I felt like a big weight had been taken off my shoulders. I didn't want to do this anymore.
He claims he's as happy as ever.
I had a lot of fun. I met a person who, there is such a thing as a soulmate, she was. I had my children. I had everything I wanted, yeah.
Perez-Olivo says his disbarment has cost him nothing. He has plenty of opportunities outside of law to make money, which is good because he's going to need it. He has a lot of expenses to keep up with. Most noteworthy, the $5,500 a month rent he has to pay for his new house in Chappaqua, the one 3 doors down from the most famous power couple in the world, Bill and Hillary Clinton. For Perez-Olivo to keep his head above water, he's going to have to get creative, dangerously so. When American greed returns, Carlos Perez-Olivo finds himself fighting for his life in more ways than one.
The woman and her husband, a disgraced lawyer, were attacked Saturday night.
Oh, I knew I wasn't going to be a suspect. I'm telling you, I was a criminal attorney for 30 years. Of course they're going to look at me. They'd be stupid not to look at me.
On November 18, 2006, recently disbarred attorney Carlos Perez-Olivo and his wife Peggy are enjoying a date night in Manhattan. By around 10 p.m., they are on their way home. As Peggy sleeps, Perez-Olivo decides to fill the car with gas. That decision will take them up Route 100, a twisting highway through dark woods. There are no lights and little traffic. On the way to the station, tragedy strikes.
911.
Hi. I just got...
Are you in Austin?
We just got shot.
To get to the gas station, there's a stretch of road that's basically isolated. Car came up, cut in front of me.
He says he comes to a complete stop, barely avoiding a collision with the car in front of him.
Next thing I knew, the guy opened the back door. He got out. He had a gun. I mean, I remember coming to the side. He opened the door and got in the back seat.
According to Perez-Olivo, the man doesn't say a word, but holds the gun up where Perez-Olivo believes he can grab it.
What I did was I grabbed the gun. I was trying to twist it to take it away from him. And we were struggling. Gunshots, gun fired. I believe it was 3 shots.
One of the shots hits Perez-Olivo in the side, allowing his assailant to escape. Perez-Olivo turns his attention to his wife in the front seat.
I remember seeing that Peggy had her head by the window. And I said, Peggy. And there was no answer, so I figured something was wrong.
What happened to you? He ran me off the road. He ran you off the road? Yeah, went back on the back seat.
Okay, are you driving a car right now?
I'm trying to get my wife to be here. I'm trying to get my wife to the hospital. I think she might be.
Okay.
I think she got shot.
Okay, take it easy. She got shot, you said?
Within 15 minutes, they are at Northern Westchester Hospital. Perez-Olivo is shot through the side, but the injury is not life-threatening. Peggy, however, is much worse. She has been shot in the back of the head and is completely non-responsive.
I was telling them, forget about me. Go take care of my wife. Forget about me. They sedated me a bit and took my clothes off and then cleaned me up. And I never saw my wife again.
Before dawn, Peggy succumbs. The assault has become a homicide, and the story makes headlines all across New York. Rebecca Baker covers courts and crime for the Westchester newspaper, the Journal News.
It was a huge story right from the beginning. The big news typically in that section of the county is when a BMW gets dinged.
And public comments by the police just add fuel to the fire.
The story was unusual, and that's the way we looked at it.
He had said, have you ruled him out as a suspect? And they said, we haven't ruled anybody out. And that was really the first clue that he was being looked at as having some kind of involvement in Peggy's death.
In the meantime, Perez-Olivo continues to cooperate with police, and he has his own possible theory about what happened that night.
The first thing out of the police's mouth was, have you ever been threatened? Do you have any problems? So yeah, I've had death threats. One of the names that I initially gave them was Elio Cruz.
Perez-Olivo represented Elio Cruz in a murder trial in 2005. Like many of Perez-Olivo's clients, Cruz is left with a bitter taste in his mouth.
He basically botched the defense. He was in the middle of his closing arguments, and he said he had forgotten the rest of his statement.
Perez-Olivo claims this is a distortion of the truth.
In the closing argument, I said to the jury, as I always would say a lot of times, look, I think he's not guilty because of this. There may be things that I didn't catch or that I'm forgetting now.
If forgetfulness is his strategy, it doesn't work. When the verdict comes back guilty, Elio Cruz is outraged. And according to Perez-Olivo, Cruz lets him know it.
Basically, I believe the threats were that his life was ruined and he was going to ruin my life.
Could that include murder? When American Greed returns, has Perez-Olivo's cavalier lawyering led to his wife's death? Or do the police have another idea?
Their narrative of this whole ordeal was that this was a murder for money.
For more information on Carlos Perez-Olivo, visit americangreed.cnbc.com. We'll be right back. In Westchester County, New York, investigators from the Newcastle Police Department continue questioning disbarred attorney Carlos Perez-Olivo about the 2006 shooting death of his wife, Peggy. Perez-Olivo continues to present the possibility that an ex-client orchestrated the roadside ambush that killed his wife, but police apparently don't think this was a hit gone bad. In November of 2007, reporter Rebecca Baker is alerted to 2 civil court filings that suggest what the police might be thinking.
2 life insurance companies stopped payment on Peggy Perez-Olivo's death because Carlos still hadn't been ruled out as a suspect.
On December 20th, 2007, Perez-Olivo is indicted for the murder of his wife.
Once the papers were handed up with the indictment, it really ripped open the whole case and showed what the police had been working on all these months.
The prosecution will show that Peggy had nearly $900,000 of life insurance at the time of her death, an amount that had increased by more than 50% in the previous 18 months, with Perez-Olivo named as the primary beneficiary. And it appears that Perez-Olivo could use it. Prosecution documents cite that he has less than $200 in his 3 bank accounts at the time of her death. And furthermore, Perez-Olivo had been carrying on a 10-year affair with a woman he had met in Puerto Rico. In fact, he sent her flowers just 2 days before the murder.
This whole alternate story that had nothing to do with a hitman, that had nothing to do with an ambush, all of a sudden came out. The whole game had changed.
Yeah, I'm sure we have it.
Perez-Olivo hires attorney Christopher McClure to defend him. To McClure, the affair is simply a cheap distraction.
They had no direct evidence linking him to the murder of his wife. So what they had to do is they had to show or try and show a jury that he wasn't a nice guy. You shouldn't believe him. He's a disbarred attorney. He cheats on his wife. Based upon those things, he killed his wife.
The mere fact that I did send her flowers more or less on that day shows that the last thing from my mind was to do anything wrong. Because, I mean, I think you can tell I'm a fairly intelligent person. I'm not an idiot. And that's only an idiot would do something like that, all right?
For prosecutors, the affair simply shows Perez-Olivo's ability to put his own concerns ahead of those of his family.
The mistress was a side attraction. Their narrative of this whole ordeal was that this was a murder for money.
When the trial begins on September 12, 2008, the Westchester County District Attorney's Office, led by Janet DeFiore, lays out its case. Carlos Perez-Olivo, prosecutors say, takes the long way home not because he needs to get gas, but because it's a dark and desolate road, the perfect place to commit a murder.
We believe that Mrs. Perez-Olivo was asleep in the front passenger seat of the car when her husband slipped in the back seat behind her and placed the muzzle of the gun under the headrest and fired one shot, the fatal shot that killed her.
As a sort of alibi, prosecutors say, Perez-Olivo shoots himself in the side, then calls 911 in a frantic tone that only mimics despair.
I believe that it's very likely he went over this again and again in his head, and he rehearsed every step of this plan, including what he would report to the police in the 911 call.
And they say he did it all for the money.
Mr. Perez-Olivo was having financial difficulties. His bank accounts, the balances were dwindling. His credit card debt was mounting.
The defense then offers their response in their opening remarks. Perez-Olivo doesn't take an odd route home. The gas station he was driving to was one he uses all the time. They have the credit card statements to prove it. There is no such thing, they say, as a superficial gunshot wound to the abdomen. There are much safer places to shoot oneself if the desire is an alibi. And he is not, in fact, broke. He has cash stashed outside the country and continual access to more. And of course, there's the 911 call.
Okay, take it easy. She got shot, you said? I tried to fight the guy, and I'm stupid.
12 and a half minutes. That's what they're saying. You faked it for 12 and a half minutes. Given the Emmy now, or whatever the award would have been, to sustain that level for a full 12 and a half minutes while on the phone, I think would have been hard to fake.
Lastly, they offer their most compelling evidence that Perez-Olivo could not be guilty of this crime.
To a person, including siblings, which two of Peggy's siblings testified, and the children testified that Carlos was in love with Peggy.
They all said that they were the perfect couple. No one who knew them believed that Carlos could ever murder her.
When American Greed returns, Carlos Perez-Olivo tries to overcome the sins of his past. Will it be enough to convince a jury?
I don't know where you guys are from or anybody else, but affairs is common everywhere. If people were to kill their wives because they're having an affair, there'd be few wives around in the world today.
In September 2008, Carlos Perez-Olivo stands trial for the murder of his wife, Peggy. A murder the prosecution says Perez-Olivo committed for the nearly $900,000 of life insurance he stands to gain. Perez-Olivo says that his wife was killed by a stray bullet when he fought with an attacker in the backseat of his car. But at trial, the prosecution presents a vast array of circumstantial evidence that disputes his story. Evidence, for example, that Peggy was shot from extremely close range, execution style, and that she was facing forward in her seat, meaning that she would have had to stay asleep during the struggle Perez-Olivo claims happened in the back. They also present the hospital's surveillance video showing Perez-Olivo's arrival.
You could see that here is a man who was perfectly turned out. He had a dress shirt that was neatly tucked into his pants. He did not have the look of a man who was just in a life and death struggle.
But the prosecution's case eventually comes back to the money. Perez-Olivo apparently has no problem taking $10,000 or $20,000 from poor, desperate clients. Why wouldn't he, prosecutors asked, take nearly $900,000 when the opportunity arises?
He was out of work. He couldn't practice law anymore. He had no way to make an income, and that the only way that he saw out of it was these life insurance policies that belonged to his wife.
And not only had the life insurance on Peggy increased by more than $300,000 in the year and a half before she died, just 3 months before her death, Carlos lets a $500,000 policy on himself lapse for non-payment.
It's very unusual for the person who earns the more moderate income to be so highly insured, and the person who is ostensibly the major breadwinner in the family is so, by all accounts, underinsured.
Perez-Olivo claims that he never knew how much insurance his wife had, and as for allowing his to lapse, it's just a simple case of mismanagement.
We were careless, both of us, with paperwork. If they looked at the records, which I'm sure they did, it wasn't the first time I had let it lapse.
What's more, Perez-Olivo claims there's ample evidence of his financial solvency in the year between his wife's murder and his arrest. A time during which he never got a dime from the life insurance policies.
That house was rented. That was $5,500 a month. It got paid. I had bought a new car for my daughter the year before when she started driving. The insurance got paid. The heating bills got paid. I mean, you know, if you're supposed to have economic problems, you're supposed to be going crazy, you're going to kill your wife of 30 years, you'd think there'd be something to back that up. But there isn't.
The source of all this money, according to Perez-Olivo, is some clients of his from South America who don't always operate on the right side of the law.
I got them off on criminal charges. They're concerned about coming to the United States or leaving their countries because they're concerned that there's a sealed indictment somewhere. I had never wanted to work with them because I knew that part of the proceeds of the things that they may be getting were from other things, and I didn't want to be connected in that. But once I had to find a way to make a living.
Perez-Olivo says he doesn't do anything illegal. But at trial, while claiming that he has a source of income, the defense never offers evidence as to what it is.
Keep in mind, it's not our burden to prove anything. It's the prosecution's burden to prove that that was the motive. It's not our job to disprove it.
In reality, the reason the details aren't shared may be that it would require Perez-Olivo to take the stand, and the defense is afraid of what might be revealed.
All the jury knew at that point in time was that he had been disbarred. They didn't know any of the reasons why. And if Carlos testified, they'd know all the reasons. So it would have added, now he's disbarred, he cheats on his wife, and he cheats his clients.
Perez-Olivo's shady past has come back to haunt him. The man who once dazzled juries with his speech now sits silent in his own murder trial. The case goes to jury Friday, October 3rd, 2008. By midday Saturday, they return with a verdict. Carlos Perez-Olivo is found guilty of murder. Sentencing is 8 weeks later. His children, utterly convinced of their father's innocence, pass a letter on to Christopher McClure to read to the judge on their behalf.
My family has been destroyed. We have no mother, now we have no father. It is impossible to describe the anguish each of us deals with on a daily basis.
Look, as a professional, as a mother, of course, my heart breaks for those children. I can't imagine what it's like to have lost your mother and to have a jury tell you that you lost your mother at the hands of your father.
Nevertheless, District Attorney Janet DeFiore believes that Perez-Olivo should serve the maximum time allowed by law. And Judge Barbara Zambelli agrees. Calling Perez-Olivo a master of deceit, she hands down the maximum sentence, 25 years to life. Perez-Olivo is currently working on his appeal, and he is confident that his conviction will be overturned. But for now, he sits waiting in the Attica Correctional Facility in New York.
In a sense, just marking time. You know? Nobody can do anything to me now that can hurt me, because it's already been, nothing will compare. I survived that. I almost didn't, but I have.
If I got sentenced to 7, 8 years, why can't you get sentenced? The only way...
To some former clients, he is exactly where he belongs. After all, Perez-Olivo's path from disbarment to prison began with them, sitting in jail, waiting for him.
We were thinking about our families. He didn't feel sorry for me. He didn't feel sorry for none of us.
You want me to feel sorry for him? No. For his family? No. Not at all. After we went through, no. Happened to him because he was greedy.
The market's hitting new benchmarks. Is it a bubble? Stay tuned to find out. Plus, fed up with the price at the pump? Me too. I'm finding profits in the pipelines that move the slick stuff around. It's a stock that helps you fight back. Don't move. Mad Money's coming up next.
Business Intelligence.